Hej allihopa! Välkomna till Tomorrow's Trädgård och tack för att ni har trotsat regnet för att komma hit till oss idag och vara med. Mitt namn är Paula Eriksson och jag är ansvarig för Corporate Affairs och Communications på The Absolute Company. Och vi är ett dryckesföretag och vi är även Sveriges enskilt största livsmedelsexportör tack vare Absolut Vodka. Och vi har Tomorrow's Trädgård som en del av vårt program Tomorrow's Table. Där vi vill lyfta kreativa näringar och framförallt med fokus på mat- och dryckesentreprenörer. Och syftet är att vi vill visa att Sverige är en nation i världsklass när det gäller måltidsupplevelser. Och vi är här i Almedalen under 2 dagar med fokus på mat och dryck och på entreprenörskap. Och eftermiddagens första samtal heter Transformationsekonomin och hur konsumtion kan förändra världen. Och jag skulle vilja lämna över ordet till Nils von Heine som är moderator och multientreprenör. Välkommen Nils.
Tack så mycket. Ja, jag har den här. Men den kanske behövs sen. Fantastiskt trevligt att få vara här i regnet. I'm actually going to switch to English because with me today I have 2 American guests. There were supposed to be 3, but Mike from Tesla had to go back to California because his co-worker, their head of production, just quit to join a competitor by surprise, apparently. So Mike got stressed out and had to go back. But I hope we'll be fine anyway. And maybe that's actually a sign of the times that there are more electric car companies coming into the world right now. Because there's something interesting happening right now in how we consume things. Tesla is just one example. Last year in December, Tesla Model 3 became the 4th best-selling car in the US. In our neighboring country, Norway, more than 50% of all new cars sold are electric. At the same time, we have a huge explosion in things like yoga and meditation. So also, if you look at numbers for the US, the number of people who do yoga and meditation have risen dramatically. So meditation has actually, it's 3-fold as many people doing it now than just 5 years ago. And that's a really old practice that's really taking hold. So it's more than 14% of Americans are now actively meditating on a monthly basis. Also, we have new things to eat. We have Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger. We have Swedish Oatly that are making a change in the type of consumption that's connected to things that we consume into our body. And we have participatory events like Burning Man that sell out in seconds and engage millions of people worldwide. So something is happening, right, in the consumption pattern of the world. 20 years ago, 2 researchers, Joseph Pine and James Gilmore. Thank you for that, Gilmore. They published a white paper around what they call the progression of economic value, which they could have called the evolution of consumption and consumption patterns. And back then, 20 years ago, they pointed out that historically we've moved through different phases of how we consume things. So we started with goods and raw materials, and then we went into a product era where we bought products, and then that turned into a service era. So instead of us, buying coffee at the store, we went to the coffee shop and bought the service of coffee. 20 years ago, they pointed out that then we were heading into the experience economy, when instead of just paying for product and services, we start paying for experiences, and we pay a premium for that. So basically what we're paying for is, kind of an emotional reaction that something feels nice. Back then, perhaps the pinnacle was Starbucks. You went into Starbucks and you had an emotional reaction because it felt nice. This was not just an ordinary coffee shop. It was a concept. There was a certain kind of music, a certain kind of smell. This was your third home away from home and the office. So you pay for that emotional response, but you also pay for the social currency. This is something you can show off. This is something we can tell our friends about and these days post to Instagram. And we've been living in this experience economy for quite some time, but now, and also based on Pine and Gilmore's way of structuring things, we are entering the next era, which is the transformation economy. And that's what we're going to dive into even deeper today. And one way to look at it is to basically move from the experience economy into the transformation economy, where all of a sudden we expect more from the experiences. I don't only want to experience something that feels nice in the moment and something I can tell my friends about or show them. I also want something to happen with me because of this experience. I want to transform. I want to feel that I'm becoming a better version of myself. So all of a sudden, we see consumers spending more time and money on basically working on ourselves in the world around us. So these days, I'm the product. Everything I consume is just an accessory to me. And what I'm investing is the next version of Nils. And that has a lot of promise and also a lot of interesting aspects to it. So I'm happy to welcome two Americans to the stage. Bill Melayson, that some of you have already met in the lunch earlier today. Bill, feel free to step on up. And then Ted Greeno, a tall gentleman from the States with nice glasses. So let's sit down.
Have a seat.
This is yours.
Oh yeah, this is mine.
Have a seat. So one thing that I before we go into this, that I just realized, if you look at how this day is structured here in tomorrow's Trädgård, we started this morning with a seminar focused on the future of investors and investing. And then Bill here, who will shortly introduce himself, was part of a lunch that just happened here called Tomorrow's Thought Leaders, where the focus was circularity and regenerative business, which really it's focused on operations and companies and businesses, right? And now we're talking about consumers. So we basically moved from investors to businesses to consumers, and what's interesting is that everything is pointing in the same direction. But let's get into it. First, instead of me trying to explain who you guys are, who are you?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, go.
Okay. Hello, Bill Melayson. Who am I? That's a interesting question.
Let's not go existential on that.
These times of transformation. I work with a company called Mandala. And we do a process called conscious innovation. And so we're working with companies to help them think about what the future is and what their future is and what their role in it might be. And we do it with the lens towards making business purpose-driven. We talk about purpose-driven growth and the idea that as a business, you have a role to play in making society better. And that's how we work with companies to take them through that process.
So, Tad Greeno, thank you for the introduction, Niels. A little bit about myself. So, first of all, I'm sorry I'm not doing this in Swedish. I'm not fluent yet. It's been 6 months, so please be patient with me. Out of respect, I would love to do it in Swedish, but not quite there yet. I have a few words like trött, because I have a 2-year-old. That's about all. I'm sure I butchered that. But anyways, and I'm also not kind of a skilled public speaker. I'm here because I'm really passionate about this topic. I think some of the experiences that I've had at Nike, I was there for 11 years and then worked with Nike for 2 years on top of that on the advertising side. I also, like Bill, hearing his story earlier, I have a rather unconventional story. I started in a very linear, conventional path, pre-law. World was good. There was a structure and there was form, and then I blew all that up, which is fantastic. I also tend to swear a lot. I'll try not to do that here. But what I think is interesting is my time at Nike. I had a number of pretty exciting roles. One of them was ideating around a retail space and how we were going to look at the future of the consumer in that channel. The other was around performance apps for the iPhone. At the time was I think we called Nike Plus, which is now Nike Running Club, Nike Training Club, which has been started as an ancillary part of the business, but now is now part of the full service ecosystem. But that experience now I'm trying to bring to Absolute, because I feel like Absolute, in terms of its values and what it stands for outside of just the wet goods alone, is pretty exciting territory. So I'm part of that discussion and trying to move forward with a plan for that.
Maybe we should even go into Nike, because that's one of the most well-known examples, I think, of a large company that early on realized what's going on with the transformation economy and made changes. So I'm curious to learn, like, how and when did that happen in that company, and what did you guys do?
I mean, I'm not sure the intent was either planned or forced. I think it saw success as a wholesaler, a good degree of success as a wholesaler of products, but it needed eventually to move beyond that to start to own channels and start to understand consumer behavior. So that was a really important step, I think, in the life cycle of Nike. If you think about some of those other things that it's now been introducing, we always did that in a pilot format. Because if you just look at the organization, the size of the organization, you could never metabolize that sort of thinking and the innovation that's required. So we needed sponsors within Nike to kind of help us block and tackle and get some of those barriers out of the way. So there were small kind of these incubator units, I think is the way that you talked about it earlier. And that was something that we explored, trialed, tested, and then put out into the world. Now, not everything was successful. Nike Running Club as an experience, as a performance way to make athletes better was part of the DNA, the heritage of the brand, which was, again, around making athletes better. So it was a natural extension of that.
Yep.
Coaching in your ear was another aspect of that, which created a more and more dimension and depth around those experiences. But I think what made it successful, again, was the way it was a structural fix to get after a consumer problem. And that, to me, what was particularly exciting about it, because that would always have the consumer in mind, the athlete. And the everyday athlete is certainly an athlete in all aspects and form. And so that was rather, I would say, a broader way of looking at it, as trying to provide those services to everybody and to truly democratize that.
Yeah,
it's
I think
pretty exciting.
that's a really interesting point, is that Nike has sat at this along the spectrum where they've worked with athletes and taken performance and made it mainstream. Right? So they work with performance-based athletes, and those are their sponsors. And then they think about, okay, well, how do we bring that to everyday people? Right? How do we make running accessible to the everyday person who maybe used to be an athlete and wants to become an athlete again, or wants to feel like an athlete again? How do we make products, services, experiences for those people who are looking to, if we're going to put it in the transform economy language, who are looking to transform who they are as people. Excuse me.
Maybe it's also not surprising that these things started earlier in that line of business, where it's actually sort of about transformation to begin with, compared to a lot of other businesses, like athletes and whatever Nike is offering is connected to that.
Yeah.
And you can also see a lot of, like, if you look at how people are working out these days, I know we spoke about this a bit earlier, that it's become more of a holistic approach, right? So I think CrossFit, that I know you're into, is one example of that.
The thing that I think is interesting about the trend in workout, as you plotted across the story that you told about moving from products to service to experience to transformation, is that you used to do a workout through a gym membership, right? And it was on you to have that experience. Now you do a workout like you're part of a church, or at least in the States. Is everybody familiar with CrossFit, by the way? Or are some people familiar with CrossFit? Does anybody do CrossFit? Okay, a couple of people.
Soul Cycle?
Soul Cycle, is that something that's come here as well?
Not here yet.
Not here yet? No. But the point is that these things have become religions for people. Right? So you're not only buying a gym membership, you're buying into an identity. You're buying into a thing that quite literally changes you. So I remember one of the most powerful experiences at CrossFit gyms would be when you'd welcome a new member and they would get their first pull-up. The whole entire gym would stop and start to cheer the person so that they would feel the energy of the whole place. Come on, you can do it, right? And then, my brain watching it from kind of like a marketing business perspective went, oh my God, this is genius. They have just created a customer for life. right? Because that person has done something that they believed was impossible. Do a pull-up. It was impossible for that person to do, and they just did it. They're gonna just hand over their credit card every month and say, "Yep, I'm in. Sign me up."
But I think what's important, because we talk about this certainly at Absolute, is it has to be authentic to your mission and to your values.
Yeah.
For Nike, it was a natural extension, right? So they've recently partnered with Headspace. That was happening. We structured that deal 2 years ago, but it's something that athletes experience. They have coaching. They have sports therapists.
Yeah.
But it's relegated to a few. And to your point about democratizing a principle or a thought, it's connected to what it stands for as a business, but it also is considered around what an athlete experiences, and was trying to basically give that experience to other people. So the Headspace partnership, I mean, if you think about, there's what they call an audio guided run, which you can find on Nike Plus. The follow through or the retention rate for people joining those programs, it's the most popular run that they have.
Huh.
And you'd think, well, that's a bit weird. I just want to hear about coaching in my ear or music or whatever. But a lot of it is around mindfulness and meditation, because ultimately the holism of your body, listening to your body, knowing the signals and following those signals is actually a really useful training tool to become a better athlete. So it seemed very obvious. But so the reason that I was turning the corner towards Absolute is Absolute has always been around conviviality, about being a progressive brand, about looking at things differently. It has the bedrock. We just need to figure out where the opportunities are based on where the friction is with the consumer. If we try to be something completely different, it's inauthentic, and consumers are going to point that out immediately. So
There's an interesting point there that you talked about athletes having, like, what is an athlete pursuing? They're pursuing transformation. They're pursuing their highest self. They're pursuing what's next. So they arm themselves with an army of coaches, tools, etc. Regular people are starting to do that, right? So it's like there's an app for that. I have an app for working out. I have a service, a community that I go to for working out. There's coaching apps are on the rise in the U.S. Online therapy applications are on the rise in the U.S. I'm not sure if those things are accessible here. Yes? Yeah. And so these are all, I think, tools that represent, as you talked about, the transformation economy.
Yeah, and there are 2 meditation apps now valued at more than $1 billion, which would be kind of unthinkable 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's truly happening now. So, and a lot of things goes into this, right?
But I mean, you're focusing on we've been focusing on rather one dimension of that. The other one is just simply around betterment, right? Whether it's the therapeutic side of it, or whether it's just simply getting experiences that allow you to experience something where you learn from that.
Yeah.
And there's so many tools and devices that you have at your disposal now. It isn't just around the meditation side and that side of well-being. It's around the learning, going from experiences, you said, into learning.
Yeah.
The question is, so where are we in that process? Are we at the incubation stage? The gestation stage, like where are we? Is it just a moment in time? In that white paper that you talked about, what does it talk about after that? So, because I think right now a lot of consumers use that. The cynic in me will say they use that as a form of currency.
Yeah.
There's some people that actually use it authentically because they want the self-improvement, but some of them just simply want the sociability of that, right? Or
The
currency
Instagram
related to that.
picture
Yeah.
from Burning Man. That
So
says I was
what is that gestation period look like, and then what it comes after? So from experiences into transformation, and how does transformation then transform into something else?
Yeah, and I think let's get there, because that's a big question. It's kind of a difficult one to answer. But let's just think about or talk about, why do we think this is happening now? Why is the transformation economy kicking in now at this moment in time?
That's a good question.
I'll go ahead and answer.
Go ahead.
These guys are too slow.
Well,
Well, one aspect, there are 2 things that could fit into it. So one is a lot of us here in this little shed have it fairly well off, right?
Yeah.
We've sort of reached the highest point of Maslow's needs hierarchy. There's not much left to do for us than self-actualization. Try to figure out who we are. Like, yeah, we're surviving, so that's fine. And then these things tend to happen. It's transformation comes from trying to understand yourself and actualization yourself. That's one aspect of it. The other is the potential threat that things perhaps won't be this nice for much longer. You know, maybe the survival issues will actually start kicking in due to climate change. And on that level, we might just understand that we need to transform, we need to change. And it's difficult for me as an individual to change all of society and all the problems I'm seeing, so I'll just start with myself.
Yeah.
Those are two potential things that are actually driving this at this point in time.
I have a third.
Go.
The third is that we've tried other things and we've realized, oh, they don't get as much value. So we've tried consuming things, essentially. And that's worked to a point, but then at a certain point you go, oh, I can only consume so much, and I only seem to get so much value out of it, right? So buying another pair of shoes maybe isn't going to get me the value that I'm looking for. So instead, what does it look like to spend money having an experience with friends? What does it look like to spend money on myself, as you said, going to a CrossFit class? Maybe there's a higher marginal value that people are experiencing, and that's what is driving consumer behavior. So just a third.
I mean, I would posit that, you know, as you know, the world is in a constant fluid motion, and there's no such thing as stasis, really. Yeah. And I think just in the evolution of how we, to your point, consume to experience, there is a degree of responsibility that you have as a more mature market. I mean, Sweden certainly is a very progressive culture, probably shows more global responsibility than any other country, I would argue. Certainly much more than the US, which I'm not very proud of. But I think there's a degree of patience you need to have, because the earlier discussion you were having is around how do you share that point of view with other people, but you have to be very cautious because you can seem tone deaf if you go into a less mature market that doesn't have the same values. So how do you share that responsibility, get to the same goal, but do it in a way that is contextually relevant for them? I think you do have that responsibility because it is, there's a climate positivity impact that we can certainly have. There is the fear factor. There is also now more of a trend towards positive news instead of, you know, the disastrous news that you hear in the world. So there's a number of things that constantly shift because we're not in a state of stasis ever. I just don't know what the emphasis. I can just tell you as a marketer, there are important seismic shifts that are happening, and that we just need to be prepared to think about where we're headed. And I'm not sure we know where we're headed yet. So that's the thing I keep kind of challenging myself with is, yes, transformation is really important, understanding where the consumer is now, because that is happening more and more. They're looking for more of those learning experiences that are going to transform them personally. But where do we also go beyond that? That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe we should dive deeper into what transformation actually is, what it means. How would you define it? Are there certain, you know, building blocks that, you know, if we offer this to consumers, that will be considered transformative and attractive?
I can take a shot at that. You know, for me, transformation, I think, is defined by an evolution of self. So it's, as you talked about, I started here as Bill version 1.0, and then I sought some self-awareness and experience and made Bill version 2.0, and then you keep progressing along that chain. And I think, you know, sometimes it gets represented in the products that you choose, I think in the experiences that you seek, where instead of, and we talked about this in the entertainment world, instead of just showing up and being entertained by an experience, there's a lot more things happening now where you want things to be participatory. You want to be a part of the show instead of just watching the show, or somehow interact with the show instead of just watching the show. So I suppose that transformation, I think, is just seeking further self-development, and then one way of doing that is participating in the world in things that are happening around you.
We have participation, we have
Yeah.
community to some extent. I think with the CrossFit example, that's a good example. What else goes in there? What else do we need to offer people?
Well, there's, it's often talked about the idea of transcendent experience. So can you give me an experience that takes me outside of myself? Can you give me an experience that makes me feel connected to something that's larger than me? I think that is what's happening at things like Burning Man, in things like CrossFit. Even in some, we were in Japan traveling around, and we went to a digital experience called the Mori Digital Museum. And it's this huge warehouse where they're projecting crazy images all over the walls. And as you navigate the experience, it's interacting with you. So it knows you're there, or it appears to know that you're there, and it responds to you. And so there's something transcendent in that. There's something beautiful in the artistic experience that they created. So I think there is a patina of the transcendent in transformation.
I mean, I'm certainly not smart enough to wax on poetic about the esoteric nature of transformation, because I'd probably put everybody to sleep and I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But what I will say is I tend to think quite simplistically and quite practically. So how does Absolute, for example, show up in the world? What value that's relevant to the brand and the mission of the brand, what do we stand for, and how can we foster that in the world? Not selfishly, but because we believe in a more open world. We also stand for conviviality and shared experiences. How can we create more value for somebody? So is it hosting? Is it issues that people have around mixology? Is it around hometainment? Is it around, there's things around security and around consent in the US. Like, how do we create an ecosystem that actually has value, will give meaning to people, and also give them an experience that they're going to learn from? That to me is my focus now, because I don't know where that's going. If you think about what Walt Disney has done and the experiences going from a one-dimensional screen into a live experiences where people value that, like that's what I want for this brand. And I think that's pretty exciting. I think that's what most marketers should try to create for the companies, for the brands that they're working with, is how am I creating more value outside of just the transactional nature of what I'm selling? If you just focus on that alone, you're going to be dead in the water, because people are asking more. They're asking for brands to participate more, to have a strong point of view, especially on the purpose side, where governments are failing them. They're looking for brands to take action. And I think that's a really exciting time.
Yeah, and it's something that brings up for me that I learned from an amazing speaker a few years ago is the narrative that goes into building a successful business or brand or organization. That it comes from leadership, but it's sort of goes into everything. In my mind, is that there are two traditional stories that tend to be told that just don't work, that won't get people engaged internally, and those non-functional stories are either the good to great story, like last year was great, next year could be better, let's make it better. Which really doesn't go deep into people. And the other is the disaster stories, like everything is going to shit, we got to fix this. If we don't, we'll all lose our jobs.
The burning platform.
Yeah, the burning platform.
We have to do this or else.
Yeah, and then the four stories that actually do work, and it comes from engaging a team, but you can use it all across the board, is what is the value we bring, or the transformation in this case that we bring to one, society, two, our clients, our customers, two, us, or three, us as a team, and four, you as an individual employee, or you as an individual in society. And I think that's a good starting point for any organization who tries to figure this out. Do you have other good examples or interesting examples from industries or organizations that you feel are doing an interesting job in terms of offering and creating transformation?
My brain was going to another place because Tad was talking about what do brands stand for. So let me just go down that route for a second to get that thought out, because I can't I think my brain holds one thing at a time as a man. So the thing that I keep seeing is brands standing up. So Nike had that famous ad campaign with Colin Kaepernick, where it, which is probably not going to be necessarily familiar here, but Nike took a big stand and said, we are going to stand with this athlete who's been thrown out of the NFL. And it's been Gay Pride Week in New York leading up to this week. I think it happened on Sunday. And the number of brands and companies who have supported that is pretty incredible. It's a seismic shift in the discourse. And so I think that's also a piece of this transformation, is that brands are trying to figure out, how do we actually stand for something that represents a better society? And I think it's quite a challenge that you have to try to do that as a brand, because it's dangerous.
Yes. It's if it's inauthentic to your essence, then you're probably not supposed to be in that business.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for Nike, there was a natural order of things, right? It wasn't, I mean, the beauty of what Nike had done in the case of creating transformative experiences was, again, it's the essence of what they do. But if you look at the commercial pressure the organization was under, this does not befit that same goal. So if you think about the service side, there wasn't a commercial orientation around that, but it had to have the right people to invest in that, to see the vision around that, because it was the essence of making athletes better athletes. Yeah. So there was a lot of obstacles. Again, commercial headwinds are a big one of them, where it can seem like it's the unscientific aspect of it, which is just brand and marketing play. But if you think about what the consumer needs and what they value at the moment, it's for brands to take action and to give them the tools to either give them a voice, help them unlock that voice. That's where you're going to provide value. That's that's great.
It seems though that most brands still don't do that, or maybe that's just my experience, that brands tend to be kind of scared.
Well, the Colin example, and it's all about environment, timing, and people.
Yeah.
So we sat on that idea for about a year and a half. And the reason for that is several-fold. So there was an 8-year, $billion deal with the NFL. That is certainly a massive handicap in decision-making when you're trying to support an athlete. That can be, some would say that could be an obstacle. And the leadership team at the time was not willing to take the risk to support the athlete. Like, that's pretty fucked up. But when you think again about the commercial and the partner side pressure to that, you get it. But at some point, you have to make the right decision. And ultimately, the only reason that it was able to make that decision was because there was a leadership change. Yeah. So either you have the right sponsors or there's a shift in how you approach those things. At the end of the day, the decision that Mark made was, we believe in the athlete. We can't let these other influences drive our decision making. Amazing. Yeah. So to support an athlete, you could say, well, to Swedes, it would be quite obvious. Like, of course I'm going to support the athletes. We believe in those values. We're going to support the athlete. But because of the financial situation and the reliance that we had on that partnership, it was distracting us from our true self. And that's where to see that finally come to fruition is pretty exciting, because, I wish that happened 18 months ago. But the fact that it finally came to life is like, means there's been a seismic cultural shift in the organization to return it back to its roots. And that's pretty exciting. But again, it had to take the right moment, the right people to sponsor those types of stories. And that's great. But you also notice it wasn't just around Colin, it was around athleticism. And that was the point. He was the tip of the spear, but the idea was around crazy dreams and becoming more of a better version of yourself, which again is around an aspect of transformation.
Yeah. And an aspect of taking risk. I remember that, like, it was kind of a risk it all theme. Yeah. It's like sometimes when you risk it all, you have to pay for it. That was part of that ad. Yes. And kudos to Nike for taking that chance and taking that risk. I mean, risk is part of transformation.
So how can an organization create like a foundation for this to happen? We can't just sit and wait for leadership change. I'm thinking.
I think for some organizations, though, it is either part of their DNA or it isn't. And if it's not there, then change isn't necessarily going to come from within. So I think what happens is they get instigated to change from external factors, right? So a competitor will enter the industry, or somebody else will push them to have to make a decision. That would be my first thought on that.
Yeah. Well, if we go to your experience in working with clients, which is not just about the transformation economy. There are many things connected to this, and we had a conversation earlier about regenerative
circular economy and
thinking,
regenerative business. Yeah,
which a lot of people here weren't part of. So feel free to do a short recap on that.
Sure. Short recap on circular economy is how to think about the life cycle of products and business so that you're designing them intelligently to be sustainable from the outset, right? And so that you think about how is a product going to be used, disposed of, and how can we design it in a way in which it reduces waste in the ecology, and that it can be reused and repaired throughout the life cycle of the product. So circular economy is really thinking about that product life cycle holistically. Then regenerative business goes a step further and says, what does it look like for business to take a role in creating opportunities for more people and businesses within the ecosystems that they inhabit? So that could be a thing like regenerative agriculture. So there's a company in the U.S. called General Mills. A number of its resources come from agriculture, from crops that they use in their cereals. They've started to see that, their costs are going to go up dramatically as climate change changes the dynamics of growing cycles, and how monoculture farming is potentially a threat to crop quality. So they started investing in regenerative agriculture as a way to renew the soil and create safer harvests. So that's regenerative business.
And to me, it's if you look at regenerative and transformation, they are, in my mind, highly interrelated. Because what you're doing when you think of a business as an ecosystem, and we have multiple ecosystems, it's our employees, it's our customers, it's the environment, it's the city where we have the facilities or whatever. We're basically saying, we should be supporters of the ecosystem. That's our role. And if we're a good supporter or a platform for the ecosystem, that will benefit us. And it's the same with looking at your clients or consumers and offering them transformations. Like, we want to be a supporter of your personal transformation. If we do a good job, you're probably going to give us money or love back in one way or another. But in the work you're doing with clients, how can a process look? Whether it starts in, let's go circular regenerative, or we understand that people are looking for transformation. How can a process like that look for an organization?
So the process that we would take them through. So part of it's around changing mind and mental models, right? So a process looks like trying to help them reimagine or rethink about how they do business and create a completely different future. So we'll do some future storytelling about, it's a whole bunch of questions of like, why do we do things that we do today? How might it be different? What would it look like if we didn't do it the way that we do it today? So what would it look like if we designed our product and didn't have the ability to use any water? And there's a good example of this. A company actually figured out how to do a completely 100% recycled t-shirt without using any water in the process. It's a company from Spain that I've forgotten the name of, but the company in the US that they partnered with is called Marine Layer. And they did this wonderful campaign where they said, send us your old t-shirts and we'll give you a $20 credit for the new one that we're going to create. That's going to be your old t-shirts recycled plus a bunch of recycled plastic, reformed according to this process that doesn't use any water. It cleans the materials with UV rays. We separate the fabrics, we put them back together, and we create a new product. So, we would take people through a process where I say, great, you have to make a T-shirt, and you have to use recycled products, and you can't use any water. What does that future look like?
Cool.
To answer your question from earlier, I think you need a sponsor at the leadership level in order for any of these ideas to metabolize. If you don't have if you have a leader that doesn't believe in inventive thinking, then you're fucked.
Yep.
So if you have that sponsor and they give you the space and they understand and appreciate what you're saying, then you have the right journey in front of you. Yep. If you don't have that, I just don't believe that any organization, unless it's the essence of who they are, if you're coming in and you try to create a seismic blunt force trauma shift, it'll be like an organ rejection. Spit it out immediately. So I think you have to, and again, I'll go back to the Nike model. If we just came in and said, hey, listen, we're going to start with this Nike Plus thing and it's going to cost you, $500 million, so you have to pilot and then try to find a way to scale it. You need to trial it and prove it out. I think to just assume that everybody's on the same page is the wrong assumption, and sometimes you need space to at least, again, pilot, test, learn, because every organizational system is different. And if you go in with the same solution, it's not going to work. If I came in with a Nike model, absolute, again, it would be a system rejection immediately. Yeah. So you have to truly understand, empathize, contextualize the situation you're in. As long as you believe in what you're doing and you have leaders like Anna who believe in value that you're trying to create for somebody, you're golden. Yeah. You just have to, especially with a large organization that's more commercially minded, you have to find smart ways to do that. You just can't hit it all at once.
And even with transformational leaders, you often have to start it outside of the existing organizational system, right? So you have a system that's good at running the existing business, and you want that system to keep going. And then what often happens when we work with clients is we set up a separate independent innovation incubator to say, okay, those people, they're going to be tasked with thinking dangerous ideas that disrupt our existing business. So make sure that they are far away from the existing business so nobody can mess with them. Because you want those ideas, as Tad's saying, you want them to incubate. You want them to run experiments where they can fail. You don't want them to be attached to somebody's business line who says, well, that needs to make money this year. That will be the surefire death of any innovative idea, trying to make money too soon.
So, on a more general level, is this even important? Why should one care about this shift in consumption?
I think for any marketing organization that considers itself consumer-centric, I think you're completely ignorant if you don't embrace that, because it is the way that consumers are consuming at this point, is they're looking for that value. If you don't believe in that, I think, again, you could be a bit clueless. It's a really important consumer experience. It's something that we're seeing. Obviously, we're trying to tackle what that is specifically for Absolute, but the great thing is it has appetite to figure it out. And I think if you don't embrace that, you're kind of missing the point around what it is to be a consumer and knowing what those consumers want and need, where the friction points are, and you're not really providing the right kind of value.
Yeah, and I would add, completely agreement on that. I would add from a sustainability perspective, I think it's hugely important to move towards a quote-unquote post-consumerist society where we're not organizing business models that survive only based on the purchase and the purchase, use, and then disposability of things, right? So we have to, I think, move to be sustainable towards an economy that's based more on experiences and not necessarily just based on things.
Cool. So let's open up if any one of you guys have something you want to add or ask these guys. There's a microphone somewhere. Do I have it? Here. The microphone bucket. Here you go.
I'm Anna Kiefer. I'm responsible for sustainability in the Nordics for the travel company TUI. And I wonder what you think that the transformation economy means for the travel industry.
Yoga retreats.
I think it's there's two things that come to mind, and they're very conflicting. On one hand, I think the travel industry sits right in the nexus of the transformation economy, right? As people get more wealth and it's easier to travel, people want to go and collect experiences. They want to go to Machu Picchu. They want to go and do a hike in Patagonia. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for the travel industry. That's on this side. On this side of my brain, I have this worry that the more that happens, the more there is a threat to these environments in these localities. Machu Picchu just went through a major issue where I think the government agreed to build hotels along the route or next to the... They build a larger airport, right? So they're going to build a larger airport that is going to be, on the one side, capable of handling more people, but now the amount of people that are going to go through those ruins, there's a whole bunch of people who said it can't handle it. It will be destroyed from the tourist industry. So those two things come to mind as I think about it.
I mean, I'll be blunt. This conversation is probably more relevant for you and useful for you, potentially, than anybody else in this room.
Yeah.
I mean, I think consumers are looking for escapism. There is certainly a trend in mindfulness vacations that are happening. The footprint, you need to be considerate of that. But the value, again, I'll think about travel and leisure. The value that you can provide based on that need sits in your space probably more than anyone else's. I could argue Nike, but I truly believe that is something that the consumer will look for from you. So my question to you would be, how would you respond to that? Right back at you.
Yeah.
No, that's what it feels. But honestly, I think that there's, there is a need. Some of it is because of the stress that people are under, the pressure that they're under for that escapism. Some people just want the currency of those experiences. I think there's more and more movement towards the mindfulness aspect and the well-being aspect. And again, I would say there's no better person in this room to talk about that than you and act on it.
Thank
You're
you
welcome.
very much. Thank you for
So come on up and join us.
Sorry, yeah.
Exactly. I think an interesting challenge, if we think about just the flight shaming that's happening now, which I guess is a challenge for the travel industry, would be to think of what is the actual value you're getting from travel. Yeah. Is it that your body gets moved from here to there, or is it something else? And how can you offer those values in new ways? Maybe you don't even have to move people around that much. Who knows?
I think there is a value in moving people around.
Yeah, there is. I'm just challenging your brain here.
Experiences, yes.
Yeah.
All right. Other thoughts, questions? People are thinking. Well, why do you think about that? Let's move into the big challenging question you touched upon. What's beyond transformation? That's a difficult one, considering we're human beings sitting right here just trying to figure out what transformation economy is all about. So thinking even more into the future is challenging. But let's try it.
Sure. So I kind of just thinking through it out loud. If what's beyond transformation, the question that comes to mind is, why am I transforming? What is it that I'm seeking in this transformation? What am I going after? And so perhaps that leads me to some element of purpose, some element of meaning. I'm seeking something. I'm trying to transform so that I feel connected to meaning. And then the next thing that comes to mind is that other T word, transcendence, the ineffable. How do I get a touch of that, and how do I bring more of that in my life? So perhaps that's what's after transformation, the economy of meaning. I don't know what that would look like, though.
We'll find out. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wish I had a crystal ball. I think I'd be bullshitting you if I said I did. And I'm certainly not capable enough to write a white paper about it. But what I would say is I feel like right now we're on the individualistic side of that experience. And it's all about me and the things that I'm learning and I want to grow. I believe that it will move into a collective phase. I still think it will be based on transformation, but I think it will be more of a group experience and a learning experience. Out of that, what sits beyond that, I don't have a clue. But I just think that there is still a need for a certain degree of selfish behavior, or that is the behavior that exists in the world today. And at some point, there will kind of move beyond that, where it'll become a little bit more holistic and more again, like I said, more collective.
I like that
Or we
answer.
start there. I don't
It's a
know.
good one.
Yeah.
I think that, I think there's a point to be made about moving from individualism to collectivism to some extent. And there's a lot of things actually pointing in that direction, depending on what type of lens you're using. I mean, obviously we're having global collective challenges in a way that we haven't had really before. And we're also, for the first time, connected collectively in a way that we haven't been before with the internet. And so it sort of makes sense. And there's a lot of talk about it.
But the behavior right now is very personal, and I mean this in a negative way, but it is more selfish than anything else because the tools that you have at your disposal make that.
The feedback loops are all individual.
Yeah. So I think at some point you'll get scale and it will become much broader than that.
Yeah.
But
And also, if you look at younger generations, like the so-called Generation Z, that's where we are right now, I think. We're running out of letters for generations fast. But they have much more collective behavior in their lifestyles already now.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point. So you've got people moving towards co-working spaces, right? Because they wanted to sort of cohere and be together. You have people moving towards co-living arrangements where part of it is economically driven I live in a city and can't afford or don't want to afford an apartment. I think part of it is also experience or interest driven of I like being part of some type of community, collective, commune, tribe.
I can, having lived in a co-living for 2 years, I can speak to that. And that was not for financial reasons at all. It's more about life quality to have these interactions with other people in a more natural way than just having we're having coffee in 3 weeks for 30 minutes when I won't even feel like it anymore.
The other thing that comes up for me about this that I think is interesting, I don't know what the statistics are here, but in America, we also have a rise of loneliness, depression, anxiety. So I think
I think it's the same here.
Is it the same here? Yeah. And so there's a lot of people talking about the fact that this is also the age of loneliness, which is an interesting thing to hold in this discussion about transformation, which is why I really liked your answer about a move towards the collective. And one thing that we do know is that human beings don't do well on their own, right? If you want to make somebody go crazy, isolate them in solitary confinement. And we're sort of seeing that at least in the States. There's been a massive uptick in mental illness, depression, and unfortunately suicide. And it's in the younger generations as well. So I think that's something to really hold and think about. What are some of the solutions for that? And maybe individual transformation isn't necessarily the answer, but a move towards community, collective, tribe in the most positive sense. Not tribalism, but tribe, connected,
I think that's also a nice way or an important way for brands and organizations to think. Like, we're not just here to sell a product and have the infinite growth that is not very healthy or sustainable. We're here to be a supporter of society and add value and help people out in their lives. And if we do that, then we have a healthy business going. And with the challenges we're seeing, transformation could be one way to get there.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes. Gilmore guy.
Hi. The Axland guy, actually. Moving into the transformational economy, we see more and more companies talking not about selling more bottles or shoes. It's about creating other values. But how would you explain that to a CFO or even the owners of companies? Because it's new way of thinking business-wise.
Yeah. Want me to take that one? I have
You go. I can.
Yeah, I have this discussion quite a bit because at some point you have to kind of look at the numbers and get to the bottom line. So there's a couple of different ways that we try to explain it. One is short-term versus long-term thinking. To say, sure, you can make more money in this quarter and this year if you do a marketing campaign that just goes after selling your goods. However, at some point that will likely run out. And we can show that the act of doing that potentially undermines future relationship with customers because it's very transactional. Instead, if you go after building long-term relationship with customers, then you can look at the lifetime value that you're attempting to capture. So that's often how we look at it, is to really try to talk to people about what's the value of things in the life cycle and what's the lifetime value of the customer. The second piece that we do is to try to value things that are not just financial, so not just sales and profit, but we try to take the conversation to other intangible things that, while they may not be as readily measurable, are still measurable. So what's your impact on the community that you're part of? How have you created wealth equality for people? In what ways have you built new opportunities in your city, your community, your region? So that's some of the conversations that we have with people.
I think also, sharing and communicating around best practices. The more examples pop up, it's easier to convince people to, consider this way of thinking, whether it's what Nike has done.
Yeah.
I think Google is doing a lot of interesting thing as an employer. And employer branding, that working at Google, you're basically being handed a book where it's like, you're going to be working on yourself while working here, and that is transformation economy in the recruitment sector. So just finding these examples and basically showing the successful companies are doing this, and there's tons of data once you start looking at it, like how things are shifting in society, and that for CFO, numbers and data tends to do the job, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the theoretical side of it is going to sound like bullshit in an organization like that, to be honest. To your point, I think giving tried and true examples, especially if you can do that within your industry and you've seen the results and the results have been massively positive. But, it could be that it's also just a challenge within that organization that will continue unless you have the right people in the roles to make decisions that are going to benefit you in a different way, right? So that's the truth. I mean, I've definitely worked for companies where they haven't necessarily, they've been on the transactional side, and that was the thinking that was going to continue, and it was going to continue to foster, and that just wasn't the right environment for me. And I'm not trying to take it down to a personal level or tell you that you should be in a new job, but I just think that trying to arm yourself to understand their point of view. Right? Again, context determines a lot of those decision making that people in those positions are making, and giving them tried and true examples, again, that are relevant based on that can be helpful. And if that doesn't work, then the challenge is the challenge.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else? Great. I think we'll wrap it up then. Thank you so much for having us. And if you're interested to learn more about interesting stuff, there's a blockchain seminar coming up at 4, I think, here in tomorrow's Trädgård, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you, Gil. Thank you, Chad.
Thank you,
so
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Tack så hemskt mycket.